Ellis B. Feaster's Radio Aircheck and Classic TV channel.
For Boston and vicinity, the weather tonight clear and cooler. The lows will be in the 40s except near 50s along the coast, with diminishing northwesterly winds becoming about 10 miles an hour by morning. Saturday, sunny and mild, the highs 65 to 70 with gentle northerly winds. Saturday night, clear, continued cool, the highs 45 to 50 degrees. On Sunday, mostly sunny, the high temperatures near 70 degrees. Right now in Boston, 54 degrees. And that's the 8 o'clock WBZ report, with portions recorded, brought to you by the Braintree Hawks, who feature the finest college hockey players in the country every Tuesday night at Ridge Arena in Braintree. I'm Maurice Lewis for WBZ News, inviting you now to join a very special program with Jerry Williams.
254-5678.
Hello, America. This is Jerry Williams. Welcome aboard. It's the fifth and final night of WBZ's 50th anniversary celebration, at least here on this program. Carl DeSuze is mumbling in one corner, Streeter Stuart in another corner, Art Gardner in another corner. We may resurrect, who knows, Art Amadon may pop in, you never can tell. And a group of, later on, Shermfellow will be here. And we're going to talk about some of the local people during the course of the night. You'll be meeting Mel Allen at 9 o'clock.
Oh, great.
Robert Q. Lewis at 9:30. Charles Corell, who played, of course, and originated probably the most famous of all radio programs, Amos and Andy. He'll be with us from California. And Bob and Ray, who originated...
Bob and Ray.
Bob and Ray,
Yeah.
and who originated that sort of radio here in Boston, as a matter of fact. Will be with us sometime during the course of the night. There's Carl DeSuze. Carl?
Good morning. That threw him a little bit.
How long have you been at BZ?
This is my 30th year.
How many?
30th year.
Yeah, 30.
Somebody was asked, my 20th, Jerry.
20th.
And Horace Rolfe next to me just dropped in. How many
Horace?
for you, Horace?
34 and a half.
34.
I want you to know I go
Streeter
back
Stuart.
to the covered wagon days, and I mean that. I went from Oklahoma to Colorado in a covered wagon, and nobody can beat that.
In a real prairie schooner.
In a real prairie schooner, and we settled on a homestead out there, and had donkeys and goats, and that's how we lived.
Who else was in the movie?
Streeter, what is it, 28 years for you?
What do you mean, 28 years?
Yeah,
I was
he's
here
the
about 2.5
longest one.
years before Carl got
I
here.
didn't
That's
know
right.
that.
Oh, yeah.
How long is it?
Absolutely.
Oh, yes. I came with WBZ in 1940. Actually, it was WBOS. It was an international shortwave station which had been operating out of Pittsburgh as WPIT on 10,000 watts, and the government regulation said that all shortwave stations would have to be increased to a power of 50,000 watts. And I was the first man hired and sent to Boston to open up WBOS. Now, it has nothing to do with the present WBOS, but those were the call letters, WBOS. And the first thing I did was some broadcasts to Latin America in Spanish. And then my regular job there was
I joined you with that operation, you remember, Streeter, when I
Yes.
first came to BZ. Mm-hmm.
And what we would do, I would translate 15 minutes of news. We were always supplied with an editorial from the New York Times. This was the State Department's part of it. And we would translate that. Then we would use the music of some of the old-time orchestras, and they would, the electrical transcriptions on the big 16-inch discs, they would spiral out the English announcing, and then we had to supply, in Spanish or French or German or Italian or Portuguese, whatever it was, an introduction for the appropriate music. And that we did that usually for a half-hour program, and then we would have specialized programs. I remember one of my most popular ones was called Eraldo De Hollywood, which was the Herald of Hollywood. And I gave away pictures of movie stars and actresses, and it was one of the most popular programs we had because everybody in Spain and Latin America and France wanted to have these pictures of the American movie actors.
Now, see, I never did. Did you know
Yeah,
that,
well, I
Carl?
was. I joined him on that operation and split my time between the two studios. And I had a grandmother living in Europe at the time who rode into the station. She heard me, and she said, well, now I can understand why you never write. You're so busy.
You joined the station in 1941, Carl?
That's right.
1941, doing the morning show or doing something else?
Yes, doing morning stuff. In fact, I worked all around the clock. In those early days, we had Red and Blue Network, and we did network shows as well as local shows, everything.
Meet the network at a certain time?
Yeah, that's right.
Those were the days when it was not unusual for an announcer to sign off the station at 1 a.m. and sign on the station the following morning at 6 a.m.
Yes, I had a schedule like that.
And I used to sleep in the piano.
Well, actually, I had been teaching in Oklahoma. I was teaching Romance languages at Southeastern State College. My title was Professor of Modern Languages, and that's how I got my job. I was visiting in Pittsburgh, and the program manager of KDKA talked with me about the possibility of coming to Boston and doing Spanish language or French language broadcasts, and I made an audition on one of the big old electrical transcription discs, and that was sent to Philadelphia at the time. The headquarters of Westinghouse were in Philadelphia, and a fellow by the name of Pete Nelson, who was heading up the shortwave operation, heard it and hired me and sent me to Boston. I was then in Boyertown, Pennsylvania, and they asked me to be here on at least on December 1st, and there was an enormous snowstorm that night, and they wanted me to be sure to be here to open up the station. They wanted to do some broadcasting to Latin America, and I drove through this horrible storm. The storm itself was mostly over, but the highways were closed. All the AAA services said that no highway traffic should hazard the roads at all that day, and of course...
this is worse than the Dust Bowl of Oklahoma.
Oh, much worse. Give me the Dust Bowl any time, of course, with a handkerchief over my face so I don't have to breathe it. But at any rate, I got in here about 8 o'clock at night, and I didn't know where WBZ was. I didn't know where anything was in
That
Boston.
broomstick antenna on the
Where
Hotel
was
Bradford.
WBZ?
WBZ was in the Hotel Bradford at that time, and Cy Young was the general manager, and Huntington Avenue was all torn up. I can remember
Still is, as a matter of fact. Here it is all these years later, and
It was
still all
worse
torn up.
Plus ça change, mon vieux, n'est-ce pas?
Yes, c'est la même chose. Yeah, that's right.
What'd you say, Streeter? Let us know.
The more things change, the more they are the same.
Yes, but I went into that drugstore near the Harvard Medical School there, and asked where WBZ was, and I was way off from the Hotel Bradford, but I found it, and Cy Young, who was the general manager, had stayed over to be sure that I would find a place to stay.
A great gentleman.
And yes, indeed. And so he had a room arranged for me, and I did some broadcasting the next day.
Is Cy Young still around?
Yes, he is.
Yes.
He lives up in Peabody.
Where are those
He lives in Peabody.
old executives?
He lives in Peabody, and not too long ago we had a big reunion at the Ritz, and Cy Young was there, and it was a wonderful thing to see a great old man like Cy at that reception.
He'd argue with you about that being old man. He's very much young in spirit.
Well, his
Still
name
is.
is Young.
How many general managers have been here, Carl, since you've been here?
I lost count. Don't ask me.
I think
things like that.
the personalities seem to be somewhat more stable. That is, the personalities like yourself and Streeter have lasted for all of these years.
We were all
Where-
members of
whereas
the boys
executives
in the
move
back,
around.
back room here. You know, we used to have little coffee clutches on the air from which arose some fabulous stunts.
Oh, are you
Art
kidding?
Gardner can tell you some of those.
Jerry, no, I was going to tell you, Streeter was telling me when he first arrived here at the scene. I was working at a station in Hartford, Connecticut. I'd been there about 5 years, and we had done some commercial work for a Springfield outfit, and they were for the Boston market. I think it was Bay State Film. They wanted some voices that weren't known in Boston, so I did a Von Monroe spot. And Gordon Swan, who was then program director for television, I guess he was PD for Radio N.
Yes, he was.
At that
For
time.
both.
He sent me a telegram, please come for an audition. We need a good man, and you sound good to us, So I arrived at the appointed day. I had to fake it from my station manager in Harvard. Said I was sick, and I was coming down for an audition. When I arrived here, there were 50 other people in the lobby, all with the same telegram, Please audition. So 9 auditions later, they said, you've got the job. For half the money I was getting in Hartford.
I could just imagine all the booming voices sitting in the lobby with their hands covered over their ears.
Clapping one ear.
Wow. Horace, what did you start out doing here at WBZ?
Oh, I started out in the mailroom, Jerry.
I was going to say general
and
manager.
I was in there.
The general manager of the mailroom. What else?
Yeah.
And from there?
From there into
He's been the
traffic,
brains
and
behind
that's
the
where I
scene.
still am.
I know, yeah.
He really is.
He's the man that gets us untangled.
If people want to know what Horace does, Horace handles that traffic, and if it's we don't know what's on that schedule, we're lost, gone forever. And it's a very difficult department because you have to keep the sponsors apart from each other. You have to make sure they run at the right time, and some nights we have very crowded schedules. He's looking at this watch now to see if I'm doing the spots.
Absolutely.
Listen, at this moment we pause for a break and stand by for more while we reminisce about WBZ's 50th anniversary with Carl DeSuze, Art Gardner, Streeter Stuart, Horace Rolfe, and others during the night. Ben Gross, the Dean of the Radio and Television Columnists. Mel Allen will be with us. Robert Q. Lewis, Charles Corell of Amos and Andy, Bob and Ray, and thousands of others.
Flair right smooth.
Flair is tough.
Flair, 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 Flair. Ooh, Flair right smooth.
Flair is tough.
Flair, Flair, Flair.
Get into show business with Flair, the pen that shows exactly how you feel. Because Flair comes filled with more than ink. Flair comes filled with love, joy, happiness, fun. Old-fashioned pens write words. Flair writes feelings. Flair, now playing at your favorite store with a cast of 12 emotionally involved colors.
Ooh, Flair right smooth.
Flair is tough.
Flair, Flair, Flair. With the smooth,
Tough.
not on point. It's the only way to write. Flair, Flair, Flair.
Where Guy Manila is at.
If you're a man whose clothes are or you'll find Milton's of Quincy and Chestnut Hill is for you. Take velveteen suits with pearl buttons at $110, or Milton's double knit suits at $115, or Milton's top name natural shoulder suits at $145. And whether your price target is low or calls for the finest, right, Milton's. Because at Milton's, you get the widest pick of fine names, whether it's a denim suit at $17 or the finest in looks, fabrics, and tailoring in 3G suits at $250. And if it's from Milton's, it fits, be it $8 jeans or $55 double knit worsted slacks with gold blazer buttons, or a $9 jacket, or a $225 double knit coat. Daily to 9, Saturday to 5:30. Come into today and say charge it at Milton's, Quincy and Chestnut Hill.
Now, on our 50th anniversary, this is the wind-up night, by the way. We've had a fantastic selection of people from old-time radio who are still around, by the way, some of them on the scene. Last night I talked briefly to Ken Carpenter of the Bing Crosby Show, and I felt a little saddened at the end when he said, when I asked him what he was doing, he said, well, I've been out of work for 5 years. And I wondered what he meant by out of work, whether that was a voluntary out of work or involuntary, and he implied somehow that it was not voluntary. And
he's still a great voice.
Right, he sounded just great last night, and I wondered why people like Ken Carpenter, passed from the scene, 5 years
in movies, and everything.
maybe long before their time. Nevertheless, let's get back to some of the people who went through WBZ. Some people will be calling up and saying, well, do you remember...
Well, I can tell you some that I remember. Gustavo de Alarcón, you remember him?
Oh, of course, doesn't everybody?
Oh, yeah. And Luis Mendoza, and Edgar Rocha, and Juan Gurinda Macera, and Calimerio Pires de Oliveira.
I only remember
Pete
one.
Nelson. Those are the guys I worked with.
Greatest chickpea cooks I've ever had.
Who are some of the personalities you remember, Carl?
Well, let's see. Art Gardner.
It was Bruce Bradley. Bruce Bradley in the 60s.
Bruce Bradley.
I think, right? I remember some of those.
I was trying to think of some of the stunts that the boys in the back room had pulled, and they were many, because these things rose spontaneously out of morning discussions, and as I say, a kind of a coffee clutch. usually on a basic subject like, have you stopped beating your wife or something of the sort, or do you think it's hotter in Boston than it is in summer? But Chick Morris used to join us for those things, the late Chick Morris, who was a newsman, and he got into a discussion because he had just been back from the Navy, and were talking about what women do all day long while their husbands are away at work. And he said he didn't see why women had so many problems with housework, why it seemed never to be done when the husbands got home. He said, well, heck, he said, when I was in the Navy, I could make a bed in a minute flat. Well, immediately, the telephone board out there was like a Christmas tree with people who called up, irate women who called up to say they'd like to see the bum do it. And so we decided we'd have a contest to see if he could really make a public exhibition of this talent, see if he could make up a bed in 5 minutes flat, or at least beat a woman making up a bed in that time. So we arranged to have Mrs. America, who was in town that week, and to make this public, we selected the most public site we could find, which was the corner of the Hotel Terrain, right at the corner of Tremont and Boylston Street. And Mrs. America was to do this. We had the executive housekeeper of the hotel be the final judge of how well the bed was to be made. And we had Chick make the bed. He did make the bed in 5 minutes flat. So did Mrs. America, a little under that time. But when Chick made it, it looked as if a pig wrestle had taken place in it. So he had to pay the penalty, which was to sleep in that bed on that street corner overnight. And we arranged from the following week for lots of people to volunteer their assistance during the stay. We had the Harvard band, the fireman's band, the policeman's band, some dances from upcountry, square dancers, and a parade of movies and theater stars. Some 50,000 people blocked that intersection at theater time. And we had models who put the boy gently to bed. And in the course of this cool but lovely October evening, with all of these hijinks going on, as I say, the whole intersection was blocked, so the theater openings were delayed at least an hour or more. And but during the course of all of this hijinks, Chick began to get very red in the face, and I saw him pull the executive housekeeper over to pull her ear over to his mouth so he could whisper, and she nodded knowingly, and presently she summoned a bellhop, and he came back carrying something in a pillowcase which he slid underneath the bedclothes. This, with 50,000 people around him. And it was interesting to see, when he saw the pillowcase first, he said, "Oh, no, not that." And she knocked it against the side of the footboard of the bed, and it had a metallic sound, you see, and so they conspired to smuggle this thing under the clothes, and it was marvelous to see, with 50,000 people looking out, the red color in his face slowly drained from his face.
Well, I think one of the funniest things that ever happened at WBZ was when Nora Adamson, may she rest in peace, who has gone from us,
one of our producers,
a woman producer, and Jeffrey Harwood, one of our commentators who has passed
Great
on.
Man.
You see, Carl has been talking about a dead man, and I have to talk about two of them, and these are the people that we worked with. And if we're going to talk about the people we worked with, they're the ones.
Pleasant and friendly ghosts. Rabelaisian at times.
Yes. Well, Jeffrey Harwood, who had a very pronounced English accent and who really did his homework as far as preparing his commentaries were concerned. I never knew of anyone who read more books and tried to keep more abreast of what was going on than Jeffrey Harwood, was canceled one night. But no one told him that he was canceled, and everyone else knew it but Jeffrey. So when it came his time to go on the air, the producer was there, and the engineer was in his booth, and the studios down at the Hotel Bradford were enormous, as big as barns. There were two of them, any one of which you could have built an enormous barn in. And Jeffrey was sitting at a table about like this with the microphone in front of him, and There was no carpet on the floor. The floors were hardwood floors. And Jeffrey was preparing to do his commentary. And I must tell you that Jeffrey always rehearsed. He rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed. He would write his script early.
He was an old actor. Yeah.
Right, and he would walk around the studio rehearsing his script out loud. And then when he was ready,
and
he sat
honking
down.
out his sinuses.
Oh, I must tell. That's another story. That's another story. Yes, that one I must tell a little later on. But this time he was all ready to go, and he sat down and started. And Nora Adamson came in, and she slammed that big door to Studio A, and she says out loud, and he thought he was on the air. He says, "Oh, cut the crap, Jeff." Well, Jeff began waving his arm. He was holding his script in the left hand, trying to read, and waving his arm. He thought a mad person had entered the studio. He's waving, get back, get back. He doesn't say anything. He goes right on reading, and again she says, "Cut it out. Who do you think you are?" And he is mortified. Here he is on the air, and he wants everything to be very perfect, and Nora's making this awful racket. And then she grabs him around the neck, and he's trying to read the script, and she begins to pull him and the chair away from the microphone. Well, he had been waving with one hand, holding the script in the other, but he could no longer, this free hand, he had to grab the microphone because she was pulling him away from the table. He was determined that the show would go on and he would do his commentary. So here he was, holding the microphone in one hand, the script in the other, and being dragged across the floor by Nora Adamson. And then, of course, when it had just gone to ridiculous extremes, then they let him in on it, and that his program had been canceled and he wasn't on the air at all.
Oh, so the good old days at WBZ Radio, folks. You see what goes on behind the scenes that you never know about. Well, Carl DeSuze and Streeter Stuart are here, Art Gardner, Horace Ruff, and another voice that you recognize. And we're going to be talking to Ben Gross, the dean of the radio columnists from New York. He was in the New York Daily News while Nick Kenny was in the New York Daily Mirror. If you know anything about radio, I would like you fellas to stand by, ask him a few questions with me, because I'm asked out. I've been asking the questions of these old-time radio people all week, but they're the same questions, so maybe you have some others as well.
Arch MacDonald has walked in, so pull up your chair to the mic there by Carl DeSuze, Arch.
We've got practically all the original boys in the back room here.
Right. Arch, when did you begin with WBZ? How long ago in radio?
Oh, my Lord. Do I have to answer that?
Yes, you have to answer. This is the week, right?
We all did.
Let's see, 1936. Just about this, matter of fact, August 1936.
Did you beat Streeter?
Yeah. Oh, yes. It wasn't Westinghouse then, though.
So
it was NBC.
You're really the dean of everybody, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And he looks younger and better than all the rest of us.
Look good. He really does look good. Fine. I'm going to break for just a moment, and we'll return with the gang.
Less than a day away, on the other side of the world, lies Australia. Australia with its golden beaches, sky-climbing cities, improbable creatures like the platypus. And you, will you see the wonders down under? Fly Qantas. Fly and drive Australia on a tour that treats you better all around. From California, it starts at $795 for your jet economy round trip, an Avis car for 14 days, and 14 nights at some of Australia's best motor inns. See your travel agent and fly Qantas.
Fly Qantas. Qantas treats you better all around. Qantas treats you better all around. Fly and drive away today on a Qantas holiday. Qantas treats you better all around. WBZ, the spirit of 103. WBZ, Boston.
Spirit of New England, WBZ, and WBZ FM Boston, Group W, Westinghouse Broadcasting at 8:30. A reminder again that tonight is the final night of our celebration here on this program, celebrating the BZ's 50th anniversary with all the BZ personalities. A few others will show up here and there. And we're going to be talking to people around the country like Ben Gross, Mel Allen, Robert Q. Lewis, Charles Corell of Amos and Andy, and Bob and Ray. Listen, when it comes to driving in places that are rough or rocky or soft and slippery, nothing beats a four-wheel drive vehicle. And when it comes to four-wheel drive, nothing beats a Jeep vehicle from President Chevrolet. That's because these vehicles have Jeep guts with powerful engines and transmissions, tough bodies and frames, strong axles and suspensions. That goes for the Jeep Original, the classic four-wheel drive, multi-purpose vehicle, and for the sporty new Jeep Commando with the mightiest engines ever. Don't overlook the Jeep Wagoneer, the one that outsells all other four-wheel drive family wagons combined. And for good reasons, there's also that Jeep truck that carries a big payload but not a big price. Come into President Chevrolet for the Jeep vehicle that's right for you. President Chevrolet, 666 Southern Artery in Quincy.
Made me think you were describing a girl I used to know.
You mean guts or sturdy and stocky? Which one? Now, which one?
Old Mother Beer gut. There's somebody.
I'm trying to find. Did she have a powerful
One
engine? How was her transmission?
That was it.
Was it a tough body and frame, Carl?
Moving chassis.
Right.
Jerry?
I thought maybe she had a strong accent.
One night.
That's the one.
One night many years ago, myself, Lindy Miller, Leo Egan, and I forget who the other player was. We had a cribbage club here many years ago. Cribbage was the thing. You remember those days, Harris?
Yes.
We'd sit in the studio,
Those
and
who
I'd be...
couldn't play poker played cribbage.
Yeah, and we had a real hot game going one night, and I don't know, some NBC show was on, and every 30 minutes we had to, everybody call for silence. Oh, you talking to me, Jim?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Yep.
And every 30 minutes we had to give a WBZ Boston, and back we'd go dealing cards. This game was going along about an hour. The man walked into the studio, and was looking at us playing for a while, and he said, I used to play that game when I was in college, and walked out. So I turned to the engineer and said, who's that? He said, well, that's Donald McGann, the new president of Westinghouse.
Nobody important, anyway.
He just joined.
Tell him to shut up and deal.
In New York, I'd like to have Ben Gross join us, the famous New York Daily News columnist, now retired. Ben, how are you? Hello?
Hello?
Ben Gross?
Yes.
Can you hear me? This is Jerry Williams in Boston on WBZ.
Oh, well, it's very nice to hear you, although I hear you very indistinctly.
Well, we'll get our man to turn us up, okay?
Yes, but the connection seems to be very indistinct.
Yeah, well, we hear you quite clearly. Can you hear me better now?
Yes, a little better. Can you hear me?
Yes, Ben, we can hear you fine.
Uh-huh.
Ben, when did you begin with the New York Daily News as the radio columnist?
That was 46 years ago.
46 years.
In 1925.
Uh-huh.
We were just coming out of the crystal set stage into the superheterodyne. So you might say that I've been looking and listening from the days of the crystal set to this time of color TV pictures from the moon.
Well, was Nick Kenny your counterpart on the New York Daily Mirror? Was your column an inspiration for the Mirror to compete with you?
I'm sorry, I can hardly hear you.
I say, was Nick Kenny's column a kind of a copy of your column? When the Mirror tried to compete with the Daily News, was Nick Kenny second in line?
Oh, no. Well, Nick Kenny once was an assistant in my department. And then he went over to the Mirror. And his column was entirely different from mine. And they were not competitors at all, you see.
Do you remember some of the early radio stations in New York City?
Oh, yes.
Because WBZ, is celebrating their 50th anniversary on the air. That's 1921.
1921.
Right, September the 20th, 1921.
In other words, you came just after KDKA in Pittsburgh.
That's right. KDKA is also owned by Westinghouse Broadcasting.
Yes.
And BZ was the next one in line. That is in terms of Westinghouse anyway. But in New York in those early days?
Beg pardon?
What were some of the stations in New York in those early days?
Well, there was WMCA, which the call letter stands for the Hotel McAlpin, or WPCH, standing for the Park Central Hotel. Madison Square Garden had a station, WMSG. Gimbel Brothers Store had a station, WGBS, and there was WLTH in Brooklyn. But most of those stations are out of existence now.
When did WEAF and WJZ and WABC come into the fore?
Well, WEAF, which later became the key station of the Red Network of NBC. Because you see, NBC, when it started, had two networks, the so-called Red Network and the Blue Network. Today, I don't think they would call it the Red Network, but they did then. And WJZ was the key station of the Blue Network. There was only one network, NBC, and it began on November the 15th, 1926, with a gala program at the old Waldorf Astoria Hotel. The old Waldorf Astoria at that time was situated where the Empire State Building now stands. And they had a tremendous program. The New York Symphony Orchestra with Walter Damrosch, Cesare Sodero's Opera Company, Harold Bauer, the famous pianist, and they did a very daring thing. They had a remote pickup from Chicago. They picked up Mary Garden, the famous opera singer, and then they switched to Independence, Kansas, to pick up Will Rogers, who gave a monologue in which he impersonated President Calvin Coolidge selling Dodge cars. And a lot of people wanted to know what Cal was doing selling Dodgers, you see. They took that seriously. Then they had on the same night practically every great jazz dance band of that time, Ben Bernie, Vincent Lopez, and so on and so on. It was a great inaugural program. And I remember that after it was over, I happened to talk to Lou Fields of the famous team of Weber and Fields, and I asked him what they thought of it. And they said, well, they thought that radio was okay, but they couldn't visualize anybody staying at home listening to this little box when you could go to a theater or to a movie. They couldn't see any future in broadcasting.
Ben, tonight I'm going to be talking to Charles Corell of Amos and Andy.
Oh, yes.
I'll be talking to him a little bit later on. And if those people didn't realize that people wouldn't sit home and listen to the box, Amos and Andy was the time when nobody was on the streets. Isn't that true?
Well, I'll tell you what. Amos and Andy, as he'll tell you, started in Chicago on WGN. And they were known at that time as Sam and Henry. And when they switched to the NBC outlet in Chicago, they wanted to take that name with them. But WGN would not permit them to do so. It was a house name. And so they became Amos and Andy. Well, I can tell you this. There's never been a comedy team, either in radio or TV, that had the popularity of Amos and Andy at that time. Motion picture houses, theaters, used to interrupt their performances at 7 o'clock. And they would announce that they will interrupt the performance for 15 minutes so the radio on the stage would tune in Amos and Andy. And I remember one time I was in Atlantic City, and as the 7 p.m. hour approached, the boardwalk suddenly became deserted. Thousands of people were piling into the hotel lobbies where they had radio sets. People stood around there listening to Amos and Andy. And after the show was over, the boardwalk would be crowded again. And as a matter of fact, when they tried to change the hours of the broadcast, the Colorado State Legislature passed a resolution condemning this change. That's a fact. And I remember one time, you see, I wrote a biography of Merlin Aylesworth, the story of NBC, called Men, Mics, and Money, which was published in Collier's. And now I've written another book which is issued by Arlington House and the Nostalgia Book Club called I Looked and I Listened, in which the story is told that Herbert Hoover, when president of the United States, asked Aylesworth, the president of NBC, to bring Amos and Andy down to Washington. He wanted to meet them. So Aylesworth took the comedy team to the White House. President Hoover was very gracious in receiving them. Now, they had prepared to tell President Hoover a lot of jokes because they knew that he liked jokes, and they armed themselves with a full supply. But they never got a chance to tell one of them because Hoover insisted on telling them jokes. And he held them that way for more than an hour.
Ben, seated with me in our studio tonight.
Who?
Seated with me in our studio tonight are some veterans of WBZ, all here for over 30 years.
Is that so?
Right, and they're all I'm going to take a short break, for the inevitable commercial,
yes,
and then come back, and I'm going to ask them all to ask you a question or two. Will you stand by, please?
I said it.
Thank you very much. Ben Gross, the Dean of the Radio and Television Columnists, probably the first in the country to do reviews and reporting on radio of that day, and of course television later on. This is Jerry Williams on WBZ's 50th anniversary. Stand by.
Antico Rosé, Italian Rosé, Antico Rosé, Italian Rosé.
It's here, the taste you've been waiting for. Antico Rosé. The rosé with the little bubbles. There's a certain bouquet with Antico Rosé. Antico, a superb and delicate Italian rosé. Imported by true wine connoisseurs, the DeSuze family, is now on the shelf of your local package store. It's light, delicate, delicious. Antico Rosé, the Italian rosé. The rosé with the little bubbles. Peppy, the Italian duck, says, buy Antico, you'll like it. Look for Peppy and Antico at your package store. Antico.
Antico Rosé, Italian Rosé, Antico Rosé, Italian Rosé, Antico Rosé.
Well, it seems like every time you turn on a radio, you hear about everyone having a warehouse sale. It's almost become a cliche. Well, Leachmare has warehouse sales too, but they're different. Why? Because they don't have them that often, and people really wait for them. Another reason that makes a Leachmare warehouse sale very different is that you'll find savings like you've never found before. Why? Because tomorrow only from 9 a.m. to 3:30 p.m., you'll find prices that are far below Leachmare's regular low prices, all at the Leachmare warehouse at 465 Medford Street in Charlestown. Tremendous savings on major appliances, stereo, television, sporting gear, just about anything you can think of. All brand names and all factory warranties apply. Remember the Leachmare warehouse sale one day only tomorrow from 9 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. at 465 Medford Street in Charlestown. That's right off Sullivan Square. These warehouse sales are very different, and they're really worth waiting for. Ask anyone who's ever been to one. Now, it's 17 minutes before 9. Ben Gross is in New York City. We're here in Boston celebrating BZ's 50th anniversary. And Ben, are you there still? Hello? Hello, Ben Gross? Must have gone off. Hello, Ben? Are we still in touch, Kenny? Hello? Why don't you let Kenny handle it until we get back with Ben and find out what happened. Carl wanted to say something. Carl?
Well, I was just going to ask him if it was Paul Whiteman who introduced Bing Crosby to network radio. I don't know, but he is the authority, of course. He would know.
Amos and Andy Arch was heard on WBZ, weren't they?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Oh, yes, they were on BZ. All right, we're back with Ben Gross now. Hello, Ben.
Hello.
Hi, we're back again. I have a group of veterans who used to sit here through all those great NBC programs and not only sit here but do things as well. Arch McDonald, I'm going to let Arch ask you first. He's currently here on Channel 56 in Boston, Kaiser Globe Broadcasting. Arch?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I used to read you very avidly and religiously, my friend, back in the days, and I used to sit in the studios here and pick up your column.
When we had the old box microphones.
Yeah, what were the condenser microphones?
That's right.
Yeah, my gosh. Do you remember way back when you were doing stories on the Clico Club?
Oh, yeah. Tico Cup
Eskimos.
Harry Reeser.
Yeah. And the snapping of the whip and all of the sound effects they used to use.
Oh, yes, they rang those sleigh bells. That's right. I remember that, and I remember the A&P Gypsies, the Silver Masked Tenor, Joe White, and all of that crew.
Yeah,
and incidentally, speaking of the early singers, do you remember who were the highest paid singers on the radio for a while?
The Happiness Boys?
No.
Arthur Tracy, the street singer.
I'll tell you, at one time, the highest paid radio singers in New York was a duo called the Radio Franks. Do you remember the Radio Franks on WOR?
Are you speaking of Frank Crummett, by any chance, and Julius Anderson?
They were paid, they made a big thing out of it, that they actually paid them $10 a minute. So for 15 minutes, they got $150, and that made the headlines, that they were getting $10 a minute.
Worth $4,000 now.
Yeah, of course.
Streeter Stuart.
Of course, those were the days, too. That came right after the first commercial went on the air. You remember what the first commercial was?
No, what was the first commercial, Ben?
Well, the first commercial went on WEAF, and it advertised an apartment house in Jackson Heights. You know where Jackson Heights is?
I'm afraid I do.
Oh, yes. Well, it's on Long Island, you know. And it was way out in the country then. Well, now, the commercial consisted of this. An announcer said, "We now introduce Mr. Blackwell." That's all, Mr. Blackwell. And Mr. Blackwell came on and gave a 10-minute talk about the philosophy of the great American writer Nathaniel Hawthorne, because the apartment house was called Hawthorne Court. And he went on and gave a talk on the philosophy of Hawthorne and pointed out that Nathaniel Hawthorne loved God's great out of doors.
He was a Bowden man.
And indicated that if you went to Jackson Heights, you would be near God's great out of doors. Now, there was no talk about how much the rentals were, no advice to come out and see the place, and that was the commercial, which cost the sponsor $100. And that was the first commercial ever to go over there.
Streeter Stuart has a question for you, Ben.
Yeah.
Ben, I wanted to ask you what you thought was the most humorous thing that happened in the early days of radio. We've been recounting a few stories that happened around the studio here, and I'm not going to take time right now, although sometime I'd like to tell you this story about a commentator we had here who used to, as one of our announcers said, hawk and clear his throat and nose. But what is the funniest thing that you can recall having happened in the early days of radio?
Oh, well, there were lots of funny things. I don't know which was the funniest. I remember once being up in the studio at WHN. You remember WHN?
Yes.
In New York?
Yes.
It was run by a little fellow by the name of Perry Charles, who later became the troubleshooter for Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Well, Perry was the studio manager, the disc jockey, the news commentator, the comedian, the interviewer. He did everything.
That sounds like BZ today.
That's right.
We've all done this.
As a matter of fact, he even, and this is no kidding, on several occasions I saw him take a broom and sweep up the studio floor.
I still do that.
Because the guys had
We all do that, Ben.
cigarette butts up the floor. And we used to go up there at night, and here's how I ran the studio. This was WHN, one of the biggest stations in New York at that time, owned by Metro-Goldwyn and by Lowe. And he'd come in and he would say, "Hey, fellas, Susie Glotz just called me up from Jersey City. She was supposed to sing tonight, and she says she's got a date with a boyfriend and can't make it. So I got 15 minutes time to fill. Do any of you know any good jokes?" And you say, yeah. And he says, well, come on and tell them, but keep it clean. So we guys used to get on the air and tell jokes without rehearsing, without any censorship of any kind. And I remember on one occasion, Ted Using came up. You remember Ted Using?
Yes, indeed. Sure do.
And he came up, and he was going to tell some jokes. And I was up there with Mark Hellinger and Perry Charles, and we started undressing him while he was on the air. You know, we took off his jacket, his trousers, and everything else, and he couldn't say a doggone thing because he was on the air.
That was the first nude radio show ever.
That's right. And and we had stuff like that. And I remember another incident in the early days. WMCA tried to be very arty, so they had a stock company which presented plays. Now, the director of this company was a Russian who evidently was influenced by the Moscow Art Theater and Stanislavski. And they one night presented a melodrama of old Russia. And the director, who, as I said, was a follower of the Stanislavski method, believed that you had to feel the part in realism. Now, this was during the days of Prohibition. Well, the script called for a drinking scene with a lot of vodka. Well, this director went down to a restaurant called the Russian Bear, this was during Prohibition, and got a bottle of bootleg vodka, and during rehearsal, the cast sampled the vodka, and they would drink this stuff. And for some reason or other, I never could figure out why, they had to go over the drinking scene over and over again. Well, by the time they got on the air, the whole doggone company was pie-eyed. Well, they get on the air, and what happened was this. The leading man, who was supposed to be riding in a drushki, in a carriage, got his lines mixed up with that of the leading lady. And he spoke her lines, and she spoke his lines. Well, the result was pandemonium, and the director signaled the engineer, and he cut the doggone program off the air, and it was announced that the program could not be carried on further because of technical difficulties. Well, it all ended by the company being pie-eyed and being dragged out of the studio because
Ben, I have
they
another
rehearsed the drinking scene too well.
Ben, I have a question that deals with, undoubtedly, you dealt with all these radio and television people over the years, and they're all very sensitive and performers and temperamental. Was there anybody that really took the burn at things you said?
Did anybody do what?
Really take the burn, get angry, want to indulge in fisticuffs with you?
No, they never did that, although I found this, that you can know a star and you can praise him for years, and he'll take it for granted and often not say a word. But although you've praised that star 1,000 times, if on one occasion you happen to find fault with something that he does, he will forget the thousands of times you praised him and only remember the time you said something.
Well, it's like politicians. They say, what have you done for me lately?
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
Ben, I thank you very much. I think Art has another call. Art Gardner here at WBZ. Art?
Yes, Ben, I was going to ask, you probably had critiqued a lot of the old musicals and the variety shows pre-war, World War II. I wonder, how did you rate them? I remember the Manhattan Merry-Go-Round, the City Service with Jessica Dragonette and Frank Parker, the Texaco Hour. Some of these great old shows on radio. How did you rate them in those days? And
well, I thought they were very good for those days. Although, of course, I thought that the Sid Caesar, Imogene Coca show, the show of shows, was probably the best of the lot in those days, you see. And they were very good for the day. But later on, there were so many variety shows on the air that format sort of wore out its welcome, because anytime you'd get a star and give him an hour to perform, he inevitably would come on with a variety show, you see. And finally, the format wore itself out, and therefore you had the oldest one of them all, the Ed Sullivan Show, forward last year, you see. Now, I think most of the variety shows hereafter are going to be built around a unified theme, you see, some basic idea, and usually with an element of satire. But the old type of vaudeville show transposed to television, in which you had just a variety acts without very much connection with one another, I think that is passé.
Ben, I don't know of anybody who knows more about radio than you do.
Well,
we appreciate your sharing these. We appreciate your sharing these wonderful times with us on our 50th anniversary.
Yes.
And your book is out. Can people read it?
Oh yes.
It's
called I Looked and I Listened.
And it had to do with the title.
It was originally published by Random House, Bennett Serves Company, and now it is republished, updated with pictures by Arlington House, and it is distributed by the Nostalgia Book Club. And I suppose if anyone went to a Boston bookstore and asked for it and they didn't have it in stock, they would order it. That's all I can say.
Ben, thank you very much. You're not writing the column any longer, are you?
No, I'm doing another book, and I'm doing some more books and some magazine articles, and I may even go on a lecture tour, and I'm making some guest appearances on radio and TV stations.
Thank you very much. Did you know Charles Corell, by the way?
Did I know what?
Charles Corell of Amos and Andy. Did you know him?
Yes, and I knew his partner.
Mm-hmm. We'll be talking to him later, and I'm going to give him your best regards.
When you talk to him, give him my regards.
I sure will. Thank you very much, and thanks for spending this time with us.
And thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Ben Gross, the dean of the radio and television columnist who wrote that column for 46-odd years with the Daily News, the New York Daily News, which has the largest circulation in the world of any newspaper, which shows you the intellect of the people in New York City. I'm only kidding. Ben's column. We're going to break away. Carl, did you want to say something before we break?
I just said that Pat of Snow Village just walked in.
We'll introduce all our guests, reintroduce them as we go around the table here at WBZ's 50th anniversary, right after news and weather here on BZ.
At the foot of Canal Street in New Orleans is one of the only things left that's free. A ferry boat ride across the Mississippi River. You're on it, moving out past cargo ships filled with bananas from Ecuador, coffee beans from Peru. You're slipping through the same waters that pirate galleons once cruised. Now the other shore appears, ancient oaks dressed in billowing moss. All this on a ferry boat ride that's free. New Orleans, one of the places that make Eastern Airlines what it is. The second largest passenger carrier of all the airlines in the free world. The wings of man.
Eastern Airlines has the only non-stop service to New Orleans at 7:20 a.m. plus direct service at 4:10 p.m. For reservations, call Eastern or your travel agent. News upcoming. Patriots fans avoid expensive parking and ride in comfort to the league-leading Patriots game with the Detroit Lions this Sunday. The Plantation Beef Steakhouse in Braintree is a very exciting offer. Take a bus from the Plantation in the South Shore Plaza and avoid that traffic hassle. The price an incredibly low $6. And in addition to the bus ride, you will receive $5 worth of food and or beverages at the Plantation after the game. Enjoy really delicious gourmet dining in the evening or join the fun in the Plantation Swing and Lounge, which features continuous entertainment every night. So call now, 848-4120, and make your reservation because space is limited. Call now, 848-4120. Remember, special Plantation buses to every Patriots game. Food, fun, and entertainment afterwards. That's 848-4120. During the course of the night, we're going to be talking to Mel Allen, Robert Q. Lewis, Charles Corell, who was, of course, in the famous team of Amos and Andy, Bob and Ray, and we'll see if we can't get Schermfelder to drag himself in after another losing Red Sox game, which I'm predicting earlier, and I don't even know the score. News upcoming. Maury Lewis is waiting.
Hi, this is Larry Glick, and I'll be seeing you in 3 hours on Radio 103.
The Spirit of New England, WBZ, and WBZ FM Boston, Group W, Westinghouse Broadcasting.
It's 54 degrees in Boston, near tonight's expected low. I'm Maurice Lewis reporting the 9 o'clock WBZ News. 3 campers have been shot to death. A 4th is seriously wounded in California's Sierra Nevada wilderness. The scene of the shooting was just 75 miles from the site of the Northern California sickle slayings of 2 persons last July. Sierra County Sheriff Sam Doyle says an unidentified man is in custody on suspicion of murder. The 90-day wage price freeze and its effects made news today on several fronts. First, the National Education Association asked a U.S. District Court in Washington to declare that pay hikes for its nearly 2 million teachers were in effect prior to August 15th and could be legally paid. The NEA suit rhymed with the government's second suit in 2 days, this one accusing a Texas landlord of raising rents in violation of the freeze. The Justice Department also